Heat shimmered above Arrow Lake, pine sap sweet in the air, and a bell rang across the boys' camp like a heartbeat. I came to heal from a hectic year. He came to teach kids courage. We met on the dock, 2 adults, steady voices. Some are asking us to listen and trust. If you appreciate gentle, heart-forward storytelling, please tap like, subscribe, and share. I record these with a steady pace for easy listening. Your stories matter too. Comment below with a summer memory or a moment of courage. Together we build a calm, compassionate corner of YouTube. Thank you for being here. They called it Camp Arrow Lake, a green pocket tucked into the Adirondacks where July is an orchestra of cicadas and the lake spreads itself out like a patient, breathing heart. I drove up from Albany in a second-hand Subaru that still smelled faintly like antiseptic wipes from my hospital shifts. I'm Evan, 31, a registered nurse who promised himself that this summer would be different, lighter, slower, kinder. I signed on as the camp health officer for 8 weeks, with an infirmary that had 2 creaky beds, a cabinet of epinephrine pens, and a window that faced a stand of impossibly tall white pines. I wasn't running from anything dramatic. I was walking toward quiet. After 3 years of nights in a busy ER, I wanted to listen to wind again. The first morning, the bell clanged at 7, and a ribbon of boys in bright tees spilled from their cabins toward the dining hall. The counselors moving around them like shepherd dogs, laughing, pointing, reminding them about sunscreen with the patience of saints. I stood on the infirmary steps, coffee cooling in my hand, and saw him out by the dock, a man with sun-browned shoulders and a faded red baseball cap, adjusting a canoe's lines. He held the rope with that easy competence that told me he'd tied it 1,000 times. Even from a distance, I could tell his focus was soft and steady, his posture open. The counselors called to him, "Caleb!" and he tipped his cap in reply. I recognized something, not from his face, but from the way the kids watched him. Trust. Our first conversation wasn't cinematic. It was practical, like most good beginnings. He brought a camper with a scraped knee up to the infirmary mid-morning. "We tripped on a root," he said, his voice warm even when describing a minor calamity. He looked older than some counselors, 28 or 29, I guessed. Strong forearms, laugh lines even when he wasn't laughing. The boy sniffled. I greeted them both, cleaned the knee, and coached deep breaths like I would with any patient, child, or adult. "My name's Evan," I said, handing out a dinosaur sticker. The boy immediately forgot the root and grinned. "I'm Caleb," he said, extending a hand. "Canoeing and lake safety. And coffee appreciator," he added with a rueful glance at my mug. We shook hands, 2 adults on the same team. He didn't grip too hard. It wasn't a test. It was hello. That afternoon, after the kids napped in their cabins and the heat hummed louder than the bees, I wandered down to the dock to introduce myself in less of a triage setting. Caleb was towel drying a paddle. He looked up, that small, unforced smile, and shaded his eyes. "Nurse Evan," he said. "Or do you prefer just Evan?" I smiled back. "Evan is perfect. Or if you're sending a kid my way, you can call me the guy with stickers." He laughed, a low, gentle rumble. "Good to know. I'm Caleb Bennett, 28, lake nerd, from Asheville originally. Came north for college, never really went back." He told me he taught middle school science during the year, and the camp pulled him like a magnet each summer. The lake, he said, taught kids patience. I heard that, and I liked him immediately for the sentence. We fell into the rhythms that make a camp feel like its own small town. Breakfast was oatmeal and blueberries and the clatter of plates. I made rounds, checked inhalers, reminded counselors to push water. On the hottest days, I stood near the path with a cooler of ice pops and a gentle persistence that made even the most stubborn teenager accept hydration in the form of sugar and cold. Caleb's voice carried over the water in the afternoons, instructing campers how to hold a paddle, how to lean when the canoe wanted to tip, how to look at the wind's small ripples and read what the lake was saying. He wore sunscreen like a saint. I noticed he always had a hat ready for a kid who forgot. He noticed I had Band-Aids with cartoon sharks. The 4th day, a heat advisory rolled in like an order we all needed to follow. The bulletin board got a new sign about shade breaks. I stepped into the dining hall with a poster about heat illness. and I felt all the counselor's eyes on me in that grateful way people look at a person who is there to keep the boundaries safe. "Folks," I said, using my hospital voice but softer, "it's hot. We're going to be kind to our bodies today. Water before you're thirsty. Rest before you're tired. If you have a headache, you're not weak. You're wise if you say something. We're a team." Caleb caught my eye and nodded. Later, he stopped by the infirmary with a stack of wet bandanas, asking if he could leave some in my small fridge for the kids who ran hot. "Smart," I said. "Smart is just experience with modesty," he replied. I laughed, because it was true. What made our conversations different from the start was the absence of hurry. After lights out, with counselors doing their last cabin checks, we'd meet on the staff porch that faced the lake. The night air was still warm, cicadas sawing at the dark, but the worst of the day's heat had gentled. Caleb would bring peppermint tea because he'd learned that coffee at night was an enemy to sleep. I'd bring a tin of shortbread cookies because I believed in kindness you can taste. We talked like people who were practicing honesty, not performance. I told him I had just finished a stretch in the ER that left my shoulders hunched even when I slept. He told me he'd just helped his younger brother move into his first apartment, and he was still learning how to not be the fixer of every small crisis. "Here's the thing," he said once. "I don't want to fix people. I want to be there while they find their own footing." I took a slow breath and felt the tension in my neck soften. "That," I said, "is a beautiful job description." On the water, he was calm. The first week, I stood on the dock as a casual observer while he taught the oldest campers a tea rescue, how to get a flooded canoe upright again. The sunlight danced in hard diamonds on the waves. He didn't show off. He did it once, then stepped back and let the kids try, his encouragement precise. "Check your balance. One hand here. Use your breath." When a boy panicked at the waist-deep wobble, Caleb was next to him in an instant, voice low and steady. "We've got time," he said. "Let your legs float. We've got time." I wrote the phrase down later on a post-it by my bed. For so long, I'd lived in the opposite. At camp, time had room. The 4th of July arrived with red T-shirts and a banner someone had saved from the 1980s. The lake held that sleepy sheen of afternoon when light doesn't know how to stop being light. We had a barbecue under the pines. A boy stepped on a pine cone, announced the world had ended, and then forgot after 3 minutes of being carried on a counselor's back. Caleb sat next to me on the grass at dusk, fireflies organizing themselves like a parade. The fireworks, launched from a floating platform, were modest but sincere. I don't love loud sounds, but I love what gatherings can mean. I watched the faces of the boys upturned, mouths open in wonder, and then I looked over at Caleb in the flare's red glow. His profile was quiet joy. He leaned a fraction toward me, not touching, just sharing the same inch of space in a way that felt like a promise. Our shoulders were close enough to feel a little heat. We were both adults, aware of ourselves, aware of where we were, aware of exactly how careful people can be while still being brave. A storm walked across the lake one afternoon, so suddenly we had to run. The dark green line approached, and I found my legs moving before the first fat drops hit the dock. Caleb blew his whistle twice, the signal for now. The older kids scooped paddles inside. A few younger ones froze, which is human and understandable. "Eyes on me," Caleb said, loud enough to cut through the rise of thunder, but warm enough that it felt like a hand offered. I took a boy's hand in mine, clammy and small, and we jogged to the boathouse together, both of us counting because counting slows the fear. In the infirmary, once the rain was hammering and the power just beginning to think about flickering, I sat with a camper who hated thunder. We breathed together. We watched the flash-to-boom count shorten and then lengthen. "You're safe," I told him, because that is true even when fear is loud. Caleb checked on us between securing boats. When the lights went out for a heartbeat and came back unsure, he stood in the doorway, wet hair plastered, and lifted his hand in a small salute. A funny, quiet relief went through me like warm tea. The storm rinsed the world, and then the heat came back with a shy, brighter face. After dinner, Caleb walked up the infirmary steps with 2 mugs. He wore a fresh shirt and the same cap. "To small victories," he said, and we clinked ceramic. We talked about storms and about control, about how adult life is learning the gentle art of being prepared and also being flexible. I told him about an older nurse I worked with who always said, "People are not problems to solve. They're gardens to tend." He liked that, leaned back and looked at the trees like he was seeing that advice in the leaves. There on the porch, we acknowledged something else too, that we were attracted to each other. We did it with clarity and kindness, two adults naming a simple truth. We also spoke about boundaries and the responsibilities we carried in a camp setting. We were both mindful. Touch would be for private moments away from our roles. Honesty would be our compass. It was a measured conversation, and it made me trust him even more. On our first shared day off, we drove into town on a 2-lane road that had more turns than seemed possible. We stopped at a diner with a chalkboard menu and a waitress who called everyone hone, but never made it sound patronizing. The pancakes were the size of steering wheels. Caleb ordered black coffee and a BLT that arrived stacked, the bacon still sighing. We talked about family, his mom, who sends postcards even when an email would do. My sister, who thinks my scrubs are a superhero costume and sends me memes about hand hygiene. He told me about coming out at 25 and the quiet relief of being seen by his friends and the slow, sometimes tender process of being seen by his family, too. People surprise you, he said. The ones who you thought would bolt stay for dinner. The ones you thought would sit it out ask for seconds. I nodded. My story was similar and different in the particulars, but that theme, surprise, felt familiar. We paid and tipped well and took a slow walk down Main Street. In the bookstore, he ran a finger across the spines like he was greeting old friends. We bought the same novel. Later, back at camp, we read on the porch in companionable silence. The good kind where turning a page is a kind of conversation. One afternoon, I learned the shape of our teamwork in a way that nurses appreciate in their bones. A camper named Jason got stung by a bee near the boathouse. He came up to the infirmary with a swelling forearm, breathing fast, eyes wide. "Evan?" Caleb's voice carried even before I saw him. Jason was allergic. His medical form warned us. I pulled the epinephrine pen while Caleb calmed him with that steady voice I was already getting used to. "Buddy, you're safe," he said, his hand on the kid's shoulder. "You're with Evan, and Evan knows exactly what to do." I did what I do: clean, assess, act, monitor, watchful as his breathing settled into an easy rhythm and the color returned to his cheeks. Caleb stayed, making small jokes about bees being very devoted to their hobbies. He breathed along with Jason like a mirror. After, when the boy was settled with a comic book and a juice box, Caleb and I stood in the doorway. He exhaled, then looked at me. "I like who I am around you," he said softly, like he was trying out the words. It was one of the most generous sentences anyone had given me. We didn't rush. That was a promise we kept to ourselves and to each other without putting it into a contract. And yet there are nights that ask something of you, and there was one such night on the lake. The sky was wide open clear, the kind of dark that lets the Milky Way show off. After final lights out, after counselors murmured their good nights, we walked down to the dock and sat with our feet skimming the surface of the water. We spoke quietly. We had, as adults, made space to be affectionate away from the eyes we were there to protect. The talk wandered. Favorite childhood summers, how peaches taste when you eat them over a sink, which constellations we knew by heart. The air smelled like pine and a little like smoke from the far-off fire ring. At some point, our hands found each other. It wasn't planned. It felt like a natural consequence of listening with your whole body. He looked at me and I looked back. "Are you okay?" he asked, because care sounds like that. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. We kissed, slow and thoughtful, a meeting of mouths that felt like saying, "I trust you." The lake lapped against the dock, and a loon called from across the water, and I remember wondering if the stars would approve. I think they did. The next morning, we made eggs for the staff early, moving around each other in the kitchen like people who had found a rhythm. We passed salt, we poured coffee, we talked about the day's schedule in that ordinary shorthand couples use. Only we weren't a couple. Not yet. Just two men stepping deliberately toward something that felt like its own bright truth. Professionally, we were careful. If we paused a second too long by the bug juice cooler, the pause was still just a second. When a younger counselor teased, "So you and Caleb are like the safety squad, huh?" I said, We do make a good team, and I meant it in every possible way. That week brought the talent show, an event that can cure cynicism better than green tea. The boys juggled, told jokes, recited poems in wavering voices, played piano with two-fingered concentration. Caleb walked on stage with a guitar so beaten it looked like it had its own stories. He sang an old Sam Cooke song quietly, the kind of quiet that makes you lean in. I sat on the side steps with a first aid kit I didn't need to open once, and I felt my chest ache in that healthy way that means you're exactly where you're supposed to be. When he finished, he looked for me in the crowd, and I lifted my hand. It felt like throwing a rope across a small distance. Summer kept teaching its small lessons. There was a day when the heat was a wall, and I moved through it like molasses. I was short-tempered with my own tiredness and irritated at a shoelace that wouldn't cooperate. Caleb found me on the porch, sat next to me without fanfare, and handed me a cold orange. "Peel this like therapy," he said, and smiled. We talked about rest like it was medicine we should respect. We both were helpers by trade, and healthy helpers learn to guard their energy like firefighters guard water on a dry day. He told me once, "My therapist says, you deserve the same gentle tone you use for others." And sometimes I can even believe her. I laughed, because that felt universal. We salted our watermelon that night, a trick an older counselor from Texas insisted made the sweetness louder. He was right. In the second half of July, a canoe tipped for real, not on purpose, and the lake reminded us that even with preparation, life asks for courage. One of the mid-camp boys stood up excited and the canoe rolled. He popped up fine, but his buddy panicked. Caleb moved like a practiced line of care. Whistle, stroke, arrival, steady voice. "Eyes on me," he said. "Breathe. Feel your vest holding you. We're okay." I knelt on the dock, threw the line like we practiced, pulled them toward us with a slow, steady rhythm. On land, the scared boy dissolved into tears, the leftover fear spilling out. I sat with him, his small shoulders shaking, and looked up to find Caleb watching me like he was memorizing something good. There's nothing flashy about praising a kid for telling you they were scared, but there is so much that is brave about it. All summer, our conversations wound around to family, as if the lake itself kept pointing us there with a wet finger on a map. Caleb's dad liked baseball and fixer-upper shows, and once, before Caleb came out to him, they watched a game and the old man said something about a player being brave for returning after an injury, and Caleb had stored that word in his pocket for later. When he told his dad he liked men, his father had stared at the TV for a long breath and then said, "Son, brave is brave. Are you happy?" Not an instant endorsement, not a cinematic speech, but a step toward each other that the months after made bigger. My dad was softer. He cried when he learned I was gay, and then he hugged me like he didn't know how to do anything else in that moment. He still worries. It's one of his hobbies. We took a day hike on a trail that switchbacked up to an old fire tower. The boys had their own trip. This was just the two of us on our day off, walking in the shade where the ground smelled like warmed earth. At the top, the tower shivered a little in the breeze, and the view stretched all the way to a mural of mountain blues. We ate peanut butter sandwiches like people in a hiking brochure and sat with our shoulders pressed in that casual, clear way couples do. "What are you afraid of?" he asked me, not like a challenge, but like a place we could sit down together. I told him the truth, that loving someone can be terrifying, not because love is a storm, but because it is an opening. He nodded, quiet. He told me he feared letting someone down, feared being absent when he was needed, feared asking for what he wanted. "What do you want?" I asked, and he smiled at the green horizon. "Steady kindness," he said. Laughter. A house where the shoes pile up by the door. A dog, maybe. Someone to peel oranges with. I tucked that list into my own ribcage like a recipe I wanted to try. Being the health officer meant I was the person who saw the small aches that come with camp life, the blister blooming on a heel, the homesickness that masqueraded as a stomach ache, the counselor whose patience had frayed to a thread. I praised kids for telling me the truth about their bodies. I praised counselors for handing me a worry before it became a crisis. And I thanked Caleb when he sent them in with a note that said, "This kid hasn't been himself." Could be nothing. Worth a check. Teamwork is a quiet word, but it holds a lot. We were careful to protect the campers' experience and dignity. On nights, we wanted to be close. We waited until the counselors did their rounds and the camp had settled. Once, on a late Sunday when the constellations looked like a chart you could trust, we went swimming at the far end of the lake where staff were allowed after hours, following the rules because rules are there for reasons. The water cupped our shoulders. We floated on our backs and named stars we guessed at. He told me about the first time he'd ever felt seen by a man he liked, when a college classmate had asked him to help paint a theater set, and their hands had both ended up covered in blue. I told him about the older nurse I dated for a year, who taught me how to make pozole and also taught me how to leave when something gentle wasn't going to grow into something good. We kissed once, water beating on our lips, and laughed softly at how human and alive it felt. Then we swam back, towels over our shoulders, the path lit by 1,000 crickets, both of us careful, both of us grateful. Early August crept in with softer mornings and the smell of campfire in the weave of every sweatshirt. The boys started telling time by how many s'mores nights were left. The staff started counting in a different way, the moments we might miss. Caleb and I were in a rhythm now, the kind that made even our silences feel full. He sat with me as I restocked the first aid cabinet. I sat with him while he patched a canoe's small leak, his hands gentle in a way that would make any nurse admire him. We were two adults learning what it meant to hold space for each other's work and for the slow, healthy opening of the heart. The canoe regatta brought noise and joy. The kids decorated their boats with streamers that got soggy immediately. I stood with a megaphone and sunscreen and a running joke that my megaphone had a compliment setting. Caleb wore that red cap and jogged down the dock like a man born to this. We made a bet, playful and specific. If Bunk 7 won, I would make him my grandmother's lemon bars. If Bunk 9 won, he'd read out loud to me for an hour from any book I picked. Bunk 9 won by an arm's length. That night, he read to me from our matching novels, voice low and cadenced, and I remember thinking, this is how you rest a heart. This is how you steady a life. Camp is not an island away from pain. One of the counselors twisted his ankle coming down the trail too fast, and I strapped it firm while he pretended he wasn't embarrassed. I believe in praising people for asking for help, even when they introduce it as an apology. Caleb came up the path carrying the counselor's backpack and a ridiculous bouquet of wildflowers that he thrust at the injured man like it was a medal. Later, he came by the infirmary with cold packs and that look of satisfaction people get when they've genuinely contributed to someone's comfort. I like caregiving, he said. It makes me feel like part of the species. I told him that was one of the healthiest reasons I'd ever heard. With 2 weeks to go, we had the kind of conversation you have when the calendar is a gentle hand at your back. We sat by the lake, knees touching, the water throwing small silver coins of light at our ankles. What do we want from after? He asked. He said after like a place we were both walking toward. I told him the truth. I had a job waiting for me at a community clinic in Albany, something slower than the ER and kinder to my sleep. He had his classroom in the fall in a small town 2 hours south. 2 hours. Not impossible. Not simple. Life rarely is. We made a plan like adults who respect details. Sundays would be ours when we could manage it. I would drive down 3 times before Thanksgiving. He would come up twice by then. We set realistic expectations and then let ourselves feel a flare of hope anyway. If this is going where I think it is, he said, I want to go slow enough to savor every turn, but fast enough not to lose the road. I put my hand on his knee. We'll check the signs together, I said, and he exhaled, and the world felt aligned. The last week of camp is always half celebration, half sadness. The boys count down to seeing their dogs. The counselors count the steps to the bus and wonder if their hearts will feel too quiet after. The closing campfire was a ring of light in a circle of faces. The director told the same story he'd told for 21 years about friendship and the lake's memory, and even the counselors rolled their eyes with affection at the familiar parts. A boy from Bunk 3 who had cried for home every night the first week stood up and talked about courage in a voice I recognized from a small victory we'd had together in the infirmary. Caleb squeezed my hand under the bench, discreet, brief, and exactly right. We were careful. We were also allowed to be human. That last night, we folded our summer away like shirts you hope won't wrinkle. We walked to the dock because endings ask you to go back to where you started, or at least to where you first realized you were in the middle of something good. The lake was a sheet of black glass. The pine trees were the kind of witnesses you want. We didn't say much at first. When he did speak, it was with that simple sincerity that had been his gift all along. "I didn't expect this," he said. "I came for the boys and the canoes and the sleep that comes after sun. I didn't expect to find someone who sits with me in a way that makes staying feel like an option." I felt the smile in my chest before it reached my face. "Me neither," I said. "I came to remember how to breathe. You let me breathe." He kissed me, a careful, grounded kiss that had the steadiness of a promise. We stayed there until the mosquitoes reminded us we were, in fact, mortal. The buses came. The goodbyes were loud and wet with tears, the kind that boys shrug about later but feel fully in the moment. The counselors stood in a line and waved like they were sending ships off. The lake went quiet in the afternoon in a way it never had been before. We cleaned. We wrote notes to the next summer's staff. We put the canoes on racks and folded the life vests just so. In the infirmary, I wrote a letter to the next nurse with tips about which cabinet sticks and which kids like orange ice pops and who to call if the power flickers. I included a post-it on the inside of the medicine cabinet. "We've got time." It had held me all summer. I wanted to pass it on. Our first Sunday after camp, I drove south on a road that held the ghost of the camp bus's cheer. The sky was a patient blue. I stopped for coffee and a sandwich cut so neatly it felt like a love letter from the deli. When I pulled up to Caleb's place, I recognized his plants by the door, the way his doormat said hello like it meant it. He opened the door in that same faded red cap, grinning like a man glad in his good fortune. "Hi," he said, and pulled me into a hug that was longer than a camp-appropriate embrace and exactly right for this honest adult moment. His apartment smelled like sawdust and lemon cleaner and a little like lake water, maybe just because memory plays tricks. He had put out peppermint tea. I laughed. He shrugged. "I like traditions," he said, and I nodded, because I do too. We cooked together as the afternoon melted. He had a habit of narrating the recipe that made me feel like we were in a cooking show where kindness is the secret ingredient. "Salt the water enough to taste like the ocean," he said, sprinkling with an arm meant for canoe paddles. "Don't crowd the pan," I replied. "Everything wants room to brown." We ate at his small table, knees bumping, a window open to let the summer sneak in. We talked about our weeks ahead, about parent-teacher nights and clinic schedules, about the way structures can be containers for joy if you let them. He had bought a dog-eared map and spread it out afterward, tracing the road between his town and mine like it was a river. "We can make this route a friendly one," he said, and it felt like naming a possibility. There were small tests, because life is not a brochure. One Sunday, traffic snarled for miles, the kind of slow that makes your thoughts loud. When I finally got to his place, everything I didn't say in the car wanted to spill out. He listened. He put a glass of water in my hand. He rubbed my shoulder until the muscle softened. He didn't fix. He tended. Another time, his school had a surprise inspection and he had to cancel our plans last minute. He apologized like a teacher apologizes to a class on a rainy day. I told him the truth. Disappointment is a sign that something matters. Then we made a Wednesday date instead. We were learning the dance of real life, the one that requires you to be flexible and faithful at once. When fall deepened and the lake we loved wore a new face in our minds, we took a weekend back up there. The camp was empty in a tender way, the cabins sleeping with their windows closed. We had permission from the director who we had told about us because honesty is a good pillow. He smiled and said, "You two were obvious, but you were respectful, which is the important part. Be good to each other." The pines were louder in the wind. The dock creaked like it had stories to tell. We stood on it again, adult men in jackets, hands in pockets, remembering our bare feet on boards hot enough to fry an egg. We held each other, looked at the water that had been our witness, and made our quiet promises like men who prefer doing to declaring. I won't pretend this is the part of the story where the camera pans to a wedding in a field of wildflowers. Life likes the rhythm of ongoing. But I can tell you this. In winter, we cooked soups in my kitchen and learned the art of a good Caesar salad from a video and laughed when we dropped croutons like confetti. In spring, he came up for my sister's baby shower and held a tiny sweater like it was sacred. We visited the camp the next summer. Not as a fairy tale return, but as two people who wanted to invest in the place where we had both been our best selves. He took the canoe out with new campers and taught them the same tea rescues, his voice as clear and steady as ever. I restocked the infirmary's Band-Aids and reminded the new nurse that hydration is love. More than anything, our love grew in those ordinary moments you might miss if you think romance is only fireworks or grand pronouncements. It grew in the way he left me the last peach, in the way I learned to see the small tightness around his eyes that meant he needed quiet. It grew in the way we said I'm sorry without being asked, and in the way we said thank you for chores and for conversations and for the simple act of being on the same team. On nights when the city noise was too much, we turned on a recording of lake water and listened to it like a language we had learned together. On mornings when work felt heavy, I texted him the weather and a reminder to drink water. He texted me a photo of his coffee and a line from a song that stuck in my head for the rest of the day. Sometimes, when I'm in the clinic and the day is under my skin, I think about what we learned at Arrow Lake that summer. You can't rush trust. You can't force ease. You can be prepared and you can keep your voice steady, and you can remember that we've got time is not a luxury. It's a way to treat each other like humans. Summer gave us a hot, generous classroom. We did our homework. We still do. If you're listening to this and thinking about your own summers, your own lakes or porches or city stoops where you learn to breathe easier with someone new, I hope you feel the old warmth on your skin again. I hope you remember how even the hottest days give way to evening, how a peppermint tea on a wooden step can feel like medicine, how a hand extended can be a bridge. Caleb and I didn't invent anything special. We paid attention. We trusted what was kind. We chose to be careful and brave at once. We kept showing up even when the day was hot and the paddle felt heavy. Turns out, love is a lot like a good rescue on a lake. A steady voice, a patient hand, and the faith that you can both get home together. The last time we walked the dock before fall snuck up on us again. He stood at the edge and breathed in the pine and the sun on water, the smell that can make a whole body remember. He turned to me with that small smile that had started this whole soft, beautiful thing. "We're doing it," he said, not as a question, but as the kind of check-in we both appreciate. I stepped close. I nodded. "We are," I said. "And we've got time." The bell rang out from the empty dining hall, the echo gentle, like applause from the trees. The lake said nothing and everything, and we walked back up the path, two adults, steady voices, still listening.